morning, folks. We're so glad that you're here for our program this morning on Winchester and the 8th Virginia and the Revolution. We welcome you on behalf of the Winchester Frederick County Historical Society, and if anyone is interested in becoming a member, we have applications, and Sissy or Sherry will be glad to talk to you about it. We'd just like to tell you about some of the upcoming events. As everyone knows, it's 2026, and we're all excited about our 250th anniversary of our country. We're just so grateful that we have such a wonderful country to live in. And we have lots of activities. Societies have things. The 250th folks have tried to put all of their plots together and make a comprehensive calendar. And you'll find some of these handouts here if you're interested. They have the QR code that you can look things up on and keep abreast of the different events that are going to be presented this year. Lots of things are coming up. Just I'd like to mention a few. The Society has an open house on January the 25th, which is a Sunday, from 12 to 4 at Stonewall Jackson's headquarters. And there's, I think Brian has some handouts if you're interested for that. Then on January 15th, Tim Humans will be giving a talk at Westminster, Canterbury at 7:30 on the making of the Revolutionary War period tour. He has made a tour of Revolutionary sites and a little bio of some of the people in Winchester. We'll have a bus and walking tour available. What this is just tells you about the tour and how it came to be and a little bit about it. So he's going to have that at Westminster on January 15th. Then on February the 16th, we have an open house at from 12 to 4 at George Washington's office, and it's free admission. And later that day, there is that's on the 16th. And then on the 22nd, there'll be a wreath laying there. And then there's going to be a Century's House mini walking tour that Tim will be leading from George Washington's office. There's a lot to take in, so. But now I'd like to welcome you to our program today. Winchester and the 8th Virginia in the Revolution. I think this is good. You're going to find this is a very exciting program. And if you're interested, we have books that our author would be happy to sign after the program. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker today, Gabriel Neville, who's the author of Last Man Standing, the 8th Virginia Regiment in the American Revolution, and various articles in Virginia, Pennsylvania, and the frontier of the Revolutionary era. His research has appeared in the Journal of the American Revolution, Emerging Revolutionary War Era, the American Battlefield Trust, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and County Historical Society journals. He's the creator of the Revolutionary Virginia, Virginia1776.com, and the 8th Virginia Regiment, 8thvirginia.com websites. He also writes occasionally on public policy issues. He's a former journalist and congressional staffer. He's a business consultant at Covington & Burling LLP, which is a Washington international law firm. He was raised in Chester County, Pennsylvania, so close to the action there, and now lives with his family in Fairfax County. Gabe, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks very much. Turn off this light just in case that helps with the PowerPoint. That helped a little bit. Thank you all for being here this morning. I'm delighted to have a big group. I want to tell you just a little bit about what's been going on with me. The last speech I gave was in Kentucky, and I was just getting a cold. And the next morning, my voice was completely shot. I was sick for 2 weeks, and then it was going away. Then my son came home from college and got me sick again. And I'm just getting over it. So if my voice gets a little bit weak, it's his fault. So you can blame him. His name's Sam. He lives at my house. And sorry that I rushed in late. My mother fell and broke her hip a week and a half ago, and she's got out of rehab this morning, and she's flying from Virginia to New Hampshire to stay with my sister. But she lives in Pennsylvania, and she didn't have a real ID. So my wife drove to Pennsylvania to find her passport and came back. She couldn't find it when she got there, so I was up all night. So, crazy stuff, but I got here in time, and we're ready to rumble. So a little bit more just about me, and I won't take too long. I am not a credentialed historian. I don't have a PhD, so that there's good news and bad news associated with that. I'm not going to spew nonsense that I learned, academic theories, and I really love the subject matter. Right? The reason I wrote the book is because I'm passionate about it. It's like sports trivia, right? The more you're into it, the more obsessed you get, and it became an unhealthy obsession. And when you get to an unhealthy obsession, the only cure is writing a book. So I wrote a book. This is a painting of the 8th Virginia Regiment. It dates back to the 20s, I think. This is actually a fairly accurate depiction of not the regimental flag, but a Grant's division banner, it's like there were a pair of them that were used for movement on the battlefield. It was painted from a written description. It has since resurfaced, and it's pretty close. So it's a fun picture to start with. Let me go to the next slide. So I'm going to start by talking about a local hero that you've probably never heard of. His name was Peter Helfenstein. He was from, can we get that to focus a little bit better? No? Okay. So he was from down here. This is the Rhine River in Germany. It flows north to the Low Countries, to Rotterdam, and then flows into the ocean. And in 1754, he and his wife and their young son, Philip, got on a boat, like thousands of other Germans from this region did. Got on a boat here, sailed to the Isle of Wight here in England, and then sailed for America. He was a cobbler. Actually, I should say a shoemaker. If you called him a cobbler, he would have been offended. In fact, that's the first sentence in the third paragraph of my book. And landed in Wilmington, Delaware. And then, let's go to the next slide, please. Took the Great Wagon Road, which starts in Philadelphia, and goes out through Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and then cuts south through the Cumberland Valley, which is in Virginia called the Shenandoah Valley, and arrived at Winchester right about the time that General Braddock was on the march. So he got there just as this became a boomtown. Population of Winchester doubled during the course of the French and Indian War, and all those people needed shoes. So he did well. He was one of, I think, a dozen people that helped fund the Lutheran church that is now at Hebron Cemetery, the ruins of the stone church. He was one of the benefactors of that church when it was built, and later became major of the 8th Virginia Regiment. So, field grade officer. Let's go to the next slide. Just to be clear, Winchester is a big, beautiful city now. Back then, it looked a lot more like this. People living in very humble log houses. There's some disparaging descriptions of Winchester from that time written by people who traveled through. It's come a long way, but back then it looked like that. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so everybody knows about Daniel Morgan. I don't need to tell this room a thing about Daniel Morgan. These two guys you might not know much about. William Dark grew up in Frederick County, but it was split in 1772 to create new counties. So he was from what is now Jefferson County. John Stevenson was as well, but back then it was all Frederick County. You probably heard about Daniel Morgan's fistfights at Battletown, right? Berryville. These other guys were involved in it too. Let's go to the next slide. And you may never have seen it. That evidently is the Battletown Tavern. It doesn't exist anymore. That is don't think it's a painting, it's a sketch, we'll call it, of what was then called the Virginia House in Berryville. From about 1864, 65, it was sketched by a Harper's Monthly artist. It looks to me like maybe the building had been expanded a little bit since the early days, but I'm not an architectural expert. But that's it. It's not there anymore, but we have an image of it. So they used to meet there and they used to fight, and it's not real clear what they were doing. It seems like most of the fights were friendly, but not all of them. Let's go to the next slide. I wish I could read this to you, but it's just going to be hard. This is the recollection of the fights written by Benjamin Barry, who was the proprietor of the Barry Tavern, or the Battletown Tavern, where they would have the fights. And what he essentially says here is he lists some of the people who used to fight there. He mentions William Dark. He mentions Daniel Morgan. He mentions Dark's brother. He mentions somebody named Isaac Height. I don't know. Just says Isaac. And he mentions John Stevenson, who I'll say a little bit more about. So they would get in these fights, and I don't know whether they were wrestling matches or boxing matches or what. It's not crystal clear. But the valor that they displayed after a couple of drinks in Berryville later manifested as valor on the battlefield. That's the point of it. So there were a crew of them, and they kind of, quote unquote, grew up together. So let's go to the next one. Okay, now, Benjamin Barry, who owned the tavern, had a brother, younger brother, named Thomas. And you're gonna hear a lot about him. There's another Frederick County guy that you've probably never heard of, and I'm gonna tell you all about him today. Let's go to the next slide. So he and Benjamin grew up in this house, and this is nowhere near here. This is in King George County, Virginia, way down in the Tidewater. That house is extremely old. It was built about 1720 by Benjamin Barry's, probably by his grandfather, who was, I think, the son of an indentured servant, if I remember the history right. The house is still there. I pulled up and knocked on the door one lady, and the lady was sort of like, "Who are you?" And we ended up spending 3 hours together. But it's really old and really well preserved and pretty cool. And this is where Thomas Barry grew up. So next picture. Okay, this one I really wish I could read for you. This is an article. In fact, how long is that wire? Is there any chance you can get that to me? If I unplug it just for a second, will that be okay? Okay, here, let me do that. So this is an article in the Virginia Gazette from 1774. Now, if you know your history, this is right after Britain closed the port of Boston because of the Boston Tea Party, and everybody's going nuts, right? Britain has sent a new governor who is also a major general in the British Army, General Gage. And Gage has issued a proclamation saying, okay, everybody needs to cut it out, because what you're doing is this close to treason, and traitors, if you're a traitor, bad stuff happens. So this is an official proclamation. It was in all the newspapers, and people mocked it. Like it was turned into verse, and people made fun of it. So I'm going to read the notice of what Winchester's reaction was to this. It has a reference to slavery in it that might bother some folks, but history is history. Yesterday being the day appointed by our sheriff for the election of burgesses, a great part of the county assembled at Winchester, among whom it was universally agreed to show their detestation to the presumption of the governor of Massachusetts, that's General Gage, of Massachusetts Bay, that his effigy should be first hanged and then suffer the flames, accompanied by his darling proclamation. An image was fabricated like him, as he must appear to the mind's eye of every American, grim as Pluto and deformed as Vulcan, lots of classical references in this period, right? It was decorated with a soldier's coat, a soldier's cap, and a wooden sword. Thus accoutered with a rope around his neck in the fatal cart, supported by an African, for the general's spirits were so depressed that it was with difficulty that he could hold up his head. He was conducted through the town, attended by a rejoicing multitude, and then suspended on the highest gallows an American governor was ever yet honored with. The proclamation was read by Mr. A. White, attorney at law, who made a very spirited and handsome speech to the people, exhorting them to be unanimous as the certain means to preserve their liberties. The torch was then applied, and the flame, as if pleased to destroy the base destroyer of liberty, embraced him with uncommon ardor and devoured him in an instant. Isn't that great? That is Winchester history right there. So what was going on that day is you probably heard about how the governor of Virginia, Lord Dunmore, dismissed the House of Burgesses because they had scheduled a day of fasting and prayer to support Boston. When that happened, they went across the street to the Raleigh Tavern in Williamsburg and decided that they were going to propose a Virginia convention, which was sort of a shadow government. And they sent everybody home for 2 months to talk to folks at home and find out, like, the sense of the people. So the way this worked is they would come home and they would have, in Winchester's case, it was election day, so everybody was in town anyway, because there was no secret ballot then, everybody got together. They had a big rally, and then they had a meeting to discuss what their feelings were, and then they issued a proclamation, or resolves. That's what was going on that day. Now, I want to put a pin in that because I realized that I read you the wrong thing. I was going to read it to you. You just got it earlier than I intended to. I want to tell you a little more about Thomas Berry. So Benjamin already owned the tavern. Thomas came and didn't own any land. If you know your Winchester history, you know that George Washington was elected to the House of Burgesses here once, right? And he beat Adam Stephen in the election. Do you remember who he ran with? There were two of them. Who was George Washington's running mate for House of Burgesses in 1750, whatever it was?
Brian Martin?
George Mercer was his name. He was a respected Virginia elite guy who had the misfortune of being sent to London for the Virginia Company, one of those real estate enterprises, when things started to get crazy around the time of the Stamp Act. And he foolishly accepted the job of stamp collector or stamp commissioner. And when he came home and tried to set up his operation, he literally got run out of Williamsburg. And then he eventually, he was ruined. And he moved back to England. He owned a bunch of land in what is now Clark County. And it was auctioned with George Washington in charge of the process. This is the advertisement for it in the Virginia Gazette. This is the Shenandoah near Ashby's Gap. Benjamin Berry Thomas Berry bought 2 lots. He bought this, it's a little hard to see, but this section here, this is a satellite image, and this island in the river, which at that time was about a quarter of this land. And so he lived out there, and that's how he got his land. Let's go to the next one, please. Yep, okay, I have to come around.
Quick question. That
Yes.
was got its name Barry's Ferry, where the bridge is.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if that's named after him or his brother or what, but
So that's where you're talking about, where 1750 goes over
yes,
the river.
yep. Mm-hmm. Is it showing up there?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Can we go to the next one? I just pushed it. Not working. I think if you use these arrows, All right, let me take it again. I think I just do that. There you go. All right, another guy, John Jolliffe. I think that's a last name that survived around here for a long time. Are there any Jolliffes in the room? Does anybody know a Jolliffe?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Are you a Quaker?
No,
Your ancestors were?
yes.
Yes, okay,
The last couple generations moved to Methodism.
got it. So did this guy. So John, I forget the names of his parents, but they were members of Hopewell, very strict at that time. Being from Pennsylvania and being of a particular generation, I associate Quakerism with draft dodgers from the Vietnam era and hippies and peaceniks, pacifists. They were pacifists, but the rest of it they were not, right? They were very, very strict. John got kicked out of the congregation because he went to a horse race. And got married by a Methodist preacher, and later became a soldier, which you'll hear more about. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, so I talked to you about the Frederick, the burning gauge and effigy. This is when I meant to start talking about that. So when the first Virginia Convention was proposed, Congress had suggested that at that same time that every county in the colonies form a committee. We tend to call them committees of safety, but that's not really true. They were just called the county committee. The committees of safety, at least in Virginia, was in Winchester, and it replaced the governor. It was the executive body for the colony. But the Frederick Committee, the Revolutionary Committee, was chaired by the rector of Frederick Parish, Charles Thurston. A little bit like Peter Muhlenberg down in what is now Shenandoah County. He also was the chairman of the committee of the county committee down there. So we can go to the next one. This is the thing I already read to you. So when they came together to decide, well, what do we think? What are we going to propose for this first convention? It started by burning gauge and effigy, so it wasn't really a mystery what people wanted. All right, let's go to the next one. This, I might be able to read this. When the committee first met, Charles Thurston gave a speech that was remembered by Taverner Beale, who was actually from Shenandoah County. He said, the most eloquent discourse I ever heard was an address by Parson Thurston about the commencement of the Revolutionary War at a meeting of the people in which, we're missing a little bit on the right here, the arbitrary and oppressive acts of the British government were forcibly exposed. The people urged to resistance, and every young man encouraged and excited to take up arms in defense of the country. The impression made by this speech to the assembly was like an electric shock, causing a universal agitation in the audience. Pretty colorful. So again, that's right here in Winchester. Let's go to the next one. These are the Frederick Resolves. Most counties produce these. Every school student in Frederick County should have this assigned as reading. They should probably memorize it. It's like Frederick County's own Declaration of Independence. Sorry for the lecture. But I pulled out 2 lines from it. The first one says that they will always cheerfully pay due submission to the acts of government and to the king when they act according to their duties and the limits of their power, right? In other words, we're loyal as long as you're not overstepping. It was a conditional loyalty, which is a big deal at the time. I won't read the one here at the bottom. It basically just says that we have got to support Boston because what Britain's doing to Boston right now, they can do to us. And if we don't do it, we're all going to be in trouble before long. Let's go to the next one. Okay. I know there's somebody in this room who doesn't know the difference between a rifle and a musket. I'm not gonna ask you to raise your hand. Oh, somebody just did, I'm not gonna say who it was, but it's important. So basically, it's the difference between fastballs and knuckleballs. That's how I put it, right? So a rifle has grooves inside that make the bullet spin. And like a football, when you throw it, it's gonna have a nice spin on it, and if it does, it'll go straight, right? But it has to be in there tightly, and that makes it hard to load. It takes time. It also does not carry a bayonet. A musket, you just throw the ball in with some powder and bang, and out it goes. But it's a knuckleball. You don't really know exactly where it's going to go. And that's why typically in this area you have soldiers lined up, and you've got 68 guys in the company all shooting in the same direction. That way they know the musket ball is going to collectively end up where they need to go. The key thing with a rifle, in terms of its utility, is you need to be pretty far from your enemy. Because it's accurate, you can shoot a long distance. But if you're suddenly real close, you get one shot, and then it's only good as a club, because it takes a long time to reload. So they were used for skirmishing, for sniping, for harassing from distances. Muskets were linear warfare. You're up front, you shoot, you reload, you shoot, you reload, you shoot, you reload, and then you charge with your bayonet. So it's almost like a spear that shoots a bullet, right? So now culturally, rifles come from Pennsylvania. People will call them Kentucky rifles. Being from Pennsylvania, that I'm deeply offended by that. I don't want to hear any of you saying Kentucky rifle. They were invented in Pennsylvania. They were from Pennsylvania. The best ones came from Pennsylvania. And remember, I showed you the wagon road that came down into the Shenandoah Valley. They came that way with the settlers, and then they started making them around here. Yes, sir.
As far as that rifle, I have descent from a grandfather that was named Meshach Browning.
Uh-huh.
He's Maryland's most famous frontiersman.
Yeah.
And I held his rifle in the Smithsonian
Wow.
last summer.
This one's in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York.
Cool.
So, and it says, they got a big display case full of these rifles, and it says that it is the first American art form, that originated in America.
Beautiful guns.
So yeah, that's a beautiful rifle. They think it was made in York County, Pennsylvania. They were also very important for frontiersmen, right? So Indians had them. They were not nearly that nice. They were trade items. Deer hunters, the deerskin trade was a big deal for 100 years. Rifles were used for that. They were used for self-defense on the frontier. So if you lived sort of west of the Blue Ridge, you were more likely to have a rifle than anybody east of the Blue Ridge. And so when Virginia started organizing troops, anybody west of the Blue Ridge, but also including Culpeper, they just said, okay, we assume you all have rifles, so we're going to make you riflemen. If you were east of the Blue Ridge, you were going to be a musketeer. Problem with that is that Virginia didn't really have any muskets that hadn't been sitting in a warehouse since the French and Indian War getting rusty. So they actually ended up using Fowlers, basically shotguns, for a while. But out here, it was all muskets. Or I'm sorry, out here it was all rifles, and they were made here too. Particularly the Sheets brothers in Shepherdstown, but they were made here too, and in Stanton. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so when Virginia starts contributing troops, the first two, as you all know, were Daniel Morgan's rifle company and Hugh Stevenson's rifle company from Berkeley County, which is now Berkeley, Jefferson, Mineral County, I think. They were not in the pay of Virginia, they were in the pay of Congress. So they were Continental soldiers right from the beginning, and they marched straight for Boston, the Beeline March. Most of you probably heard about that. Let's go to the next one. And they were rifles. The first Virginia authorization of troops. So these soldiers are all in Virginia pay. They're provincial soldiers at the beginning. This is a little hard to see, but they were raised, all of Virginia's counties were clustered into districts. We can't see, but the Berkeley district included Frederick County, Dunmore County, which is now Shenandoah County, I think maybe Hampshire County. And each district was supposed to provide one company of provincial regulars. So that's a captain, a lieutenant, a first lieutenant, a second lieutenant, an ensign, 2 musicians, 4 sergeants, 68 rank and file soldiers. So each of these districts. There were 15 districts that did this, and 8 of them went to the 1st Virginia Regiment, 7 went to the 2nd Virginia Regiment. 1st Virginia Regiment was led by Colonel Patrick Henry. 2nd Virginia Regiment was led by Colonel William Woodford. Henry was extremely popular, but utterly incompetent when it came to military matters. He didn't know a thing. Woodford was the opposite. He knew what he was doing, but nobody liked him. So, and neither of them lasted very long. But the Berkeley district raised a company of rifles led by Morgan Alexander, who joined the 2nd Virginia Regiment under William Woodford. So that's the first provincial regular company from Frederick County, and along with neighboring counties. So let's go to the next one.
Just really quick on that.
Yes.
Combs Neck Road is named after Marquis Combs, and Marquis Combs was a lieutenant in that company.
Yes. Yep. And there's a picture. Have you seen? There's a.
Yeah, he went to Kentucky.
He went to Kentucky and strangely designed his own tomb, which was kind of cool. So this is then in December of 1775, Virginia made its 2nd authorization of provincial soldiers. Now we're really at war, right? So they authorized 7 more regiments for a total of 9. And one of them is designated the German company, now, or regiment. Now, it wasn't going to be all Germans. It was going to be led by Germans. And my theory is that they wanted it to be led by Germans because they wanted to make sure it was not led by Scotch-Irish people. Just think about usual stereotypes, right? Germans are orderly, right? They're disciplined. Scotch-Irish are rebellious, and they also were not sure that Germans were going to fight because of their history. There was no question but that the Scotch-Irish were going to fight. In fact, maybe they needed to be restrained a little bit. So if you know your history of the valley, so the Great Philadelphia Wagon Road comes here and then goes all the way down here, all the way to Georgia ultimately, right? The top of the valley was German. The lower valley was largely Scotch-Irish. So the field officers for the German regiment were Peter Muhlenberg from Woodstock, Abraham Bowman from Strasburg, and our shoemaker, don't ever call him a cobbler, Peter Helfenstein from Winchester. So they are the 3 senior officers for the regiment. They're all German. Muhlenberg and Bowman are 3rd generation Germans. Helfenstein, as you know, is an immigrant from Germany. And all of the shaded counties are areas that raised 1 or 2 companies for the 8th Virginia Regiment. So the story that you've heard about Peter Muhlenberg giving a sermon and all the men in the church jump up, it's not quite true, because nobody from down here came up here to listen to a sermon by Peter Muhlenberg, right? So let's go to the next slide. Peter Muhlenberg in Dunmore County, now Shenandoah County, just like Charles Minthruston, I think largely because he was the pastor or the rector of the parish, was already a respected leader, and he immediately became a revolutionary leader. He was chairman of the Committee of Correspondence, chairman of the Committee of Safety, delegate to 3 of the Virginia conventions. There's no way to know, but I would not be surprised if the Virginia Regiment was his idea. According to him, he had no intention of being a colonel of it, but they made him the colonel. All right, let's go to the next one. These are signatures of Abraham Bowman and Peter Helfenstein. So we can go to the next one again. Okay, now we're going to get into the war. Let's go to the next one. So this is the sermon. The usual pictures you see are 75% nonsense, 25% true. But if you read the most famous accounts, and you take out all the adjectives, then it's pretty much true, right? So what's wrong with this picture is he's wearing a wig. Nobody wore wigs in this period. They powdered their hair sometimes, but nobody wore a wig anymore. That was old-fashioned stuff. He's wearing a Continental uniform. He was not a Continental officer. He was a provincial officer. The blue and buff uniform didn't exist yet, at least not in Virginia. Not for these guys. He was almost definitely wearing a hunting shirt. So that's and then what I said about recruiting. Recruiting wasn't even his job. That was Thomas Berry's job. Company officers did the recruiting. Field officers, they had other things to do. So it was not a recruiting sermon. It was a farewell sermon. So I think the rest of the story is true. And everybody knew he was a colonel too. Like part of the story is that he whips off his cloak and he's got a uniform on and everybody's gobsmacked. Everybody knew. Everybody knew, and they'd known for a long time. All right, let's go to the next one. So Thomas Berry's company from Frederick County. So Thomas Berry, you've learned about. He's the captain. John Jolliffe, the former Quaker, is the first lieutenant. Richard Easton was the second lieutenant, and this guy William Meade was the ensign. So those are the 4 company level officers. Meade dies. Jolliffe dies, and I'll tell you about that. And I told you that they had 4 sergeants, a drummer, a fifer, and 68 rank and file soldiers. This is a hunting shirt. Until about a month ago, only 4 of them were known to exist anymore. Neil Hurst in Williamsburg has discovered 2 in Germany that Hessian soldiers took home with them after the war because they were so unique and interesting. So we now have 6 of them. And they typically wore buckskin breeches, like down to the knees. Later in the war, they wore what they called overalls. We would just call them pants. But early on in this period, they wore breeches. The hunting shirt had real associations back then that are kind of lost on us now. The fringe made it seem a little bit Native American and therefore a little bit scary. It was edgy to wear one. So let's go to the next one. Henry Weiser, who joined, he said, Captain Berry gave me the appointment of sergeant when I enlisted, and I believed it, and I believe enrolled me as such. After serving some time, I applied to be released from being sergeant on the ground that I was no scholar. But I was refused and continued in the duties of sergeant for some time. Sergeants needed to know how to read, right? He knew how to read, so he made him a sergeant, but he wasn't comfortable with it.
Is that all sergeants during that time period would have to read?
I don't want to say that definitively. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I mean, I think so, but
Well,
he says so.
Part of their duties was to keep rolls, so they would have had to read or write. Okay.
Okay, there you go. Okay, next one. Isaac Dunn said the company was assembled at Ashby's Gap. So, maybe at Berry's house. It's not literally Ashby's Gap, but that's how he remembered it. They assembled at Ashby's Gap, were assigned to the 8th Virginia Regiment, and immediately marched for the south. So let's go to the next one. So this is the lower Tidewater. That's Norfolk. This is Suffolk. Hampton, off the map here are Williamsburg and Jamestown. So they marched to Williamsburg. Company officers got their commissions there, provincial commissions, not continental commissions. And then they marched down here, and Lord Dunmore was here in the lower James causing trouble. Norfolk was a trading center and therefore very close to Britain and therefore full of Tories, many of them Scotch. So their task was to control the 3 branches of the Elizabeth River and Suffolk, which was a choke point between the Great Dismal Swamp and the Nansemond River, to control Tories and contain Tories to cut Dunmore off from supplies. And that's what they did for the first few months. I'm not gonna give you a military overview of that, but that was their first job. Then Major General Charles Lee showed up. He was the commander of the Southern Department of the Army, which is Virginia and South. He was a capable but extremely arrogant British officer. And he said, we're going south, guys. I need whichever regiment is best equipped and closest to being fully recruited. That was the 8th Virginia, because they came with their own rifles, and they headed south. Let's go to the next. So the reason they went south is that the British were headed for initially Cape Fear in North Carolina, and then they went to Charleston and needed to be opposed. Now, the problem for the 8th Virginia guys is, what kind of soldiers are they? Are they Continental soldiers? They're provincial soldiers. Their job is to protect the province. Going out of Virginia is literally not their job. It's literally not what they signed up for. So the minute Lee takes them across the border, a bunch of them say, forget this, we're out of here. And they run off. There were a bunch of deserters at the beginning, and he complains bitterly about it. The ones that remained, they marched all the way down to Charleston, South Carolina. They were at the Battle of Sullivan's Island. They were not in the fort, which we remember as Fort Moultrie. It was Fort Sullivan at the time. They were at the opposite end of the island, fending off an amphibious landing of infantry. They performed very well. It was a huge victory. And then they all got malaria, and a bunch of them died. Like, lots of them died, and most of the rest were incapacitated for a long time. Let's go to the next slide. Nevertheless, news arrives of the Declaration of Independence. That's not the actual tree, but Charleston had a Liberty Tree, and the soldiers were assembled underneath the Liberty Tree, and the Declaration was read, and they had a very big event. In fact, they read it twice in the city and once under the tree with a giant parade. It appears to be actually by far the largest celebration of the Declaration in any of the colonies. Let's go to the next slide. Then Charles Lee says, hey guys, so we beat the British here. Dunmore's been kicked out of Virginia. So let's go to Florida. And we're not going to Disneyland. Florida was a British colony, which we tend to forget. It was taken by Britain at the end of the French and Indian War. And lots of Tories from the other southern colonies had fled there. So there was a big concentration of Tories there, and they were starting to organize militarily. And they were attacking Georgia, and it was really the only active live threat in the Southern Department of the Army, which is Charles Lee's job. So they had a reason to go. So let's go to the next. This is the Castillo de San Marcos. It was 100 years old at this time in St. Augustine. That's where they were going to go. There's no way they were going to take that fort. They were going to sack the town next to it. So let's go to the next. So they marched down to Sunbury, Georgia, on their way to Florida. They lacked supplies. They were all sick. Georgia was not really equipped to help them. So they just sat in a little town called Sunbury, dying of malaria all summer.
Oh.
And William Moultrie in his memoir says that they buried 15 men a day. Now, it's not just the 8th Virginia. There were North Carolina and South Carolina soldiers along too. And Sunbury is kind of a ghost town now. Then in December, they headed home to Virginia finally. The few that could do it. So let's go to the next one. And they had left 150 guys in Charleston who couldn't even march down to Sunbury. So meanwhile, in the north, the war is going horribly, right? George Washington loses in New York. He loses at White Plains. He divides his army. Charles Lee, who gets recalled up there, refuses to support him. They huddle with no tents, no blankets, in bitterly cold weather on the Pennsylvania side of the Delaware River, getting frostbite and dying. some of them have smallpox, and everybody thinks the war's over, including George Washington. He writes home, the jig is just about up, right? And they have to do something. Enlistments are about to expire, so they attack Trenton. And then they have a success at Princeton. But in the period, so this is 5 days before the Battle of Trenton. Virginia is getting word from the Northern Army that Washington is desperate. So they authorize troops. They just tell the governor, who's now Patrick Henry, because he's not a good soldier, but he makes a good politician. Right? The convention authorizes, I guess it's the House of Delegates now because we have a new constitution. They authorize Henry, just get a bunch of men and send them up. Whatever you have to do, volunteers, new regiments, whatever you need, right? So one person who raises a company of volunteers is Winchester's rector of Frederick Parish, Charles Brewston. Now, he says that the county has been cold of young men already, so he has a hard time, but there's no time to waste. So he starts recruiting kids, including his own son. Charles Thurston, John Kercheval, Henry Bush, William McGuire, they were remembered in one of their pensions as boys nearly of an age, and we know that Kercheval was 14. Right? That was not old enough to even serve in the militia, but volunteers are volunteers, right? Rules don't apply, evidently. So they marched north. They got there after Trenton, after Princeton, all of that stuff. They got there and they engaged in what was called the Forage War, which is the winter war after all those campaigns. Thurston is shot in a battle, not mortally, but he's wounded. And his volunteers were on 6-month enlistments. And so his volunteers petered out pretty quickly. Kercheval decides, you know what, I'm sticking around. Right? I like this stuff, so I'm going to stick around. I assume the other boys went home. Let's go to the next slide. And he is a neighbor of Thomas Berry here, so he gloms on to Thomas Berry and is sort of a hanger-on, and he sticks with it through the whole war. Okay, so 1777. Let's go to the next slide. One person who got malaria badly was Major Helfenstein. He was taken home by his son in a wagon from Charleston, back then it was Charlestown, to Winchester. He never recovered. He slowly died. The date is not clear, but by 1778 or 1779, he died. Evidently an unmarked grave. His wife was destitute. And the SAR just a couple of years ago got him a stone. He's in Hebron Cemetery. And that's the grave. Okay, next slide. Sorry for this one. I meant to give you guys a warning. That is smallpox. It's absolutely horrible. Extremely painful, and usually fatal. At this point in the war, Washington has lost a lot of soldiers to smallpox. Inoculation is very controversial, but he decides we've got to do it because if we give it to everybody as an inoculated dose, 95% of them will survive. But if they catch it naturally, most of them are going to die. So Washington finally makes the decision: we're inoculating everybody. So while the 8th Virginia is back home, some of the officers get inoculated. One of them is John Jolliffe. He goes to, forget the name of the doctor, but here in Winchester, and gets probably inoculated. It's possible that he contracted it naturally. Another officer, Jonathan Clark from Dunmore County, Shenandoah County, got inoculated probably but from one of these pustules. That's obviously not really Jolliffe, but and they shared quarters. Jolliffe died from smallpox, leaving, I think, 2 kids and a wife. Clark recovered and marched off to war. So lots of people died that way. Let's go to the next one. This is a notice in the Virginia Gazette saying, okay, everybody who has returned from the south needs to congregate in Fredericksburg, and we're gonna reorganize and we're gonna head to support George Washington. It didn't happen as quickly as they hoped, but they were told if they didn't show up, they were gonna be counted as deserters, treated as deserters. And that's Abel Westfall. He was the captain from the Hampshire County Company of the 8th Virginia. So let's go to the next one.
Is there a reason why they went to Fredericksburg?
It was just sort of a
Central?
I don't know, supply center, you know. When they got there, they actually asked for permission to come up to Winchester to recruit, because that's where their families and friends were. They thought so many people had died, they needed to recruit. And they asked to come to Winchester instead, and they were given permission. Interestingly, Peter Muhlenberg at this point writes a letter to George Washington saying, hey, all my guys have rifles, but they're a pain in the neck. They're hard to maintain. My guys are sleeping in the open. They're getting rusty. Can we get rid of the rifles and just give my guys muskets? And we think rifles are so much cooler than muskets that this is almost embarrassing to us. But I think part of the truth is that people had assumed that everybody west of the Blue Ridge was an expert shot with a rifle, and it just wasn't true. A lot of these guys were farmers that, you know, Shenandoah Valley wasn't really the frontier anymore. So Washington wrote back to an aide and said, I understand, I hear you, is what he said, right? Anybody who's not an expert with a rifle will give them a musket. So now you've got a regiment that is part rifles and part muskets. So that's something to remember. So let's go to the next. Okay, so they march to Philadelphia. The rank and file get inoculated, then they go to New Jersey. Now they're no longer in the Southern Department, now they're in the Northern Department, now they're no longer provincial soldiers, now they're Continental soldiers. Okay, the officers have new commissions. They are assigned to Charles Scott's brigade, so he's a brigadier general, along with the 4th Virginia, the 12th Virginia, which was also raised around here, and a couple of what they call additional Continental regiments. And they were put in Adam Stevens' division. Adam Stevens, as you know, is from Martinsburg. And this was roughly speaking the organization for the rest of the regiment's life. But even that's a complicated point. So let's go to the next one. This is impossible for you to look at, but this is the first muster roll for the completely united 8th Virginia Regiment taken at Philadelphia in April of '77. And if you were able to see the numbers, you'd be able to see how many guys had died in malaria or run off. Let's go to the next one. They also, for the first time, now have warrant officers or staff officers. Both of these guys ended up living in Winchester after the war, but neither of them was from Winchester. The guy on the left is Cornelius Baldwin. He was the surgeon of the 8th Virginia Regiment. He was originally from New Jersey. And that is Christian Strite, who was a childhood friend of Peter Muhlenberg's, a Lutheran pastor, and was the chaplain for the 8th Virginia Regiment. And they finally collected all together now in New Jersey. So let's go to the next one. This is John Kercheval attaching himself to Barry. Like, Thurston's gone, Kercheval's just hanging around. Thomas Barry shows up with the 8th Virginia Regiment. He says, I know you. Hey, can I hang out with your company? And Barry says, sure. So he's now a soldier, you know, quote unquote. He's probably 15 now in Barry's company. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so the Philadelphia campaign, I'm not going to get into for the sake of time, I'm not going to tell you battle stories, but let's go to the next one. They're at Couch's Bridge, they're at Brandywine, they're at Germantown, and some other battles. But because many of them are indeed good with a rifle, some of them are detached to Daniel Morgan's Provisional Rifle Corps. Only 2 from Barry's company, Sergeant Henry Weiser, the scholar, Benjamin Kercheval, I have not checked, he might be John Kercheval's brother, I don't know, cousin maybe. And then, and that's like the A team. The B team, these guys went north, and they were at Saratoga. The B team, which is sort of another provisional light infantry corps, was under William Maxwell from New Jersey. So Maxwell's light infantry. These guys from Thomas Berry's company were with Maxwell. Maxwell only existed for a month, but they were at the Battle of Couch's Bridge, they were at Battle of Brandywine, some other stuff. And it's not certain that they all carried rifles under Maxwell, but I think they did. All right, next one. Battle of Brandywine. Our guys are here in Scott's Brigade at Sandy Hollow. The short version of it is they have to run Washington gets flanked. These guys have to run over here. They're on high ground. They mess up getting in a line. Sullivan's division is disorderly, and they end up retreating. And then the Continentals retreat one after another. Stevens' division is the last to go. Scott's is second last to go. William Woodford, the unpopular colonel from the 2nd Virginia, he's back now as a general. He's the last to go. That's all I'm going to say about Brandywine. Let's go to the next one. At Germantown, I don't have time to tell you the full story. They go, they're under General Greene in the left wing, and their job is to push the British down against the Schuylkill River. To me, what's important here is that, first of all, Muhlenberg has been promoted. He's now a general now. Abraham Bowman is now the colonel of the 8th. And Washington has asked Congress to create lieutenant generals, and they said no. The purpose of lieutenant generals is that Washington likes to be organized with a left wing, a right wing, and a reserve army. And he wants a lieutenant general for each one. Congress said no. So because of that, when they're going to battle, Washington has to elevate major generals from their divisions to be wing commanders. And when he does that, then a brigadier general needs to be elevated to fill in for them as the division commander. And then a colonel needs to be elevated to fill in for that brigadier general running the brigade, right? And then it goes all the way down to the bottom of the line. So you're going into battle with officers that are not really used to the roles that they're in. They might not even know the field officers that they're working with. And so that happens here. Greene's wing is Adam Stevens' division, including the 8th Virginia and Charles Scott's brigade. Muhlenberg is filling in for Nathaniel Greene as division commander. He's never done this before. Adam Stevens is an arrogant SOB who thinks he knows everything. He's done it before, for about 6 months. And he starts trying to tell Muhlenberg what to do. And worse, he starts telling Muhlenberg soldiers what to do. And that breaks chain of command. They are not under his command. And when they are coming down here, they hit a British picket, a guard up here. They run down here. This is the target that they were after, Lucan's Mill. Stephen tells the 9th Virginia, which is now under Muhlenberg, go get them. So the 9th Virginia, under George Matthews, runs to go get him. And then he says, yeah, I don't think that's enough guys. Abraham Bowman, actually Bowman wasn't there, his lieutenant colonel was there. John Markham, 8th Virginia, go help Matthews in the 9th. And Markham's like, no. He's never been in this role either, right? And then William Darke used to fight at the Battletown, says, well, then I'll take the guys. And he takes about half of the 8th Virginia and chases the 9th Virginia into the fog. And they capture a bunch of British guys. And everything's going great. Everything's going great over here too. Let's go to the next slide. Here they are again, Lucan's Mill. They've captured a bunch of guys here. The right wing is doing well here, but it's foggy, it's now smoky, you've got command and control issues. The brigades start to separate, They're trying to get over fences and through yards and over walls. They can't see. And they end up, here's General Wayne's brigade. And you've got, here, this is the 4th, this is Scott, this is the 8th Virginia, that's others. They end up bookending the flank of Wayne's brigade, and they can't see each other. Meanwhile, Washington is shooting this house with a cannon, the Chew House, if you know the history. So these guys all think that the British have gotten around them. And you've got a friendly fire exercise or incident here, and the whole thing falls apart. Now, if Stephen had been sticking to his knitting and making sure that his soldiers stayed together, might not have happened. So Germantown was a disaster. Meanwhile, over here, the 9th Virginia and William Dark and his guys from 8th Virginia, they are surrounded and captured in all of them, and put in prison in Philadelphia by the British. So, disaster. Let's go to the next one. This is a soldier from Hampshire County who wrote a detailed account of his time at Germantown getting captured and in prison. It'll make you cry if you read it. It's pretty tough stuff, but he survives. Let's go to the next one. Skipping past some stuff, there's an encampment at Valley Forge. We all know about that. The 8th Virginia has lost so many soldiers by now, as have others, that it's no longer really a going concern. So Washington decides to merge it with the 4th Virginia Regiment and the 12th Virginia Regiment into a provisional unit that is literally called the 4th, 8th, 12th Regiment. There are too many officers, not enough soldiers. So when they do this, a bunch of officers are let go. One of them is Thomas Berry. He goes home, he's done. No further involvement in the war. And then at the end of the Valley Forge encampment, the 2-year enlistments for the original soldiers expire. And so a whole bunch of soldiers leave. So this is kind of the end of the 8th Virginia Regiment. The 4th, 8th, 12th survives through Monmouth, but then there's a formal consolidation, and the 8th is gone. The 12th Virginia Regiment takes the number. So if you hear about James Wood and the 8th Virginia Regiment, that's the other 8th Virginia Regiment. That's the 12th Virginia Regiment that takes the number 8 from here, but it's not the same 8th Virginia. It's confusing because they're from the same area and they all know each other, all of that. But that's kind of the end of the 8th. All right, let's go to the next slide. So this is William Dark, used to fight at Battletown, captured at Germantown because he was brave enough to go fight when John Markham was too chicken. He's in captivity for 3 years. First in Philadelphia, and then he's taken to Long Island, New Utrecht, which is just south of Brooklyn. Finally, late in 1780, he's released, and he has to walk home. There's a little story that I like to tell. It's lost on some people, but I think it's really sweet. He has to walk home. He's got no money. He's got like $3 in his pocket. And as you did in those days, you stopped at houses along the way and asked for some food or a place to kind of sleep in your barn or whatever. He stops at one place, and the owner of the house has a bird in a cage. And Dark, who has been in a cage himself for 3 years, says, "Can I buy your bird?" And the person says, "Okay, how much you give me?" Gives him $1, buys the bird, takes the cage, opens the door, and just lets the bird fly away. That's sweet. So he comes home. He's now a lieutenant colonel. He's been promoted while in captivity. And the British invade Virginia. And everybody panics. Virginia has been cold to fighting age men. Lots of men have signed up, done their duty, served their 2 years, in some cases their 3 years, and then gone home to take care of business on the farm. But Cornwallis is coming into Virginia. And the recruiting system does not work anymore. People are just defiant. They refuse to do it. They've got no money. They can't pay the soldiers. They're in real trouble. So since the recruiting system doesn't work, the governor, who was Patrick Henry, writes to Daniel Morgan and says, General Morgan, you gotta bail us out. We need you to use your popularity, your charisma to raise 3 battalions of men and come to our rescue. And he literally sends them like a stack of blank commissions. You just pick the officers, fill them out. But we need you to come to the rescue. Morgan strangely decides that they need to be cavalry, and he wastes all this time trying to find horses and saddles and all this stuff. And he gets another letter from Henry saying, cut it out, we just need bodies, get them down here. So he tries, and he can't, even Daniel Morgan can't get people to volunteer. So he collects all of the leading military men, Charles Thurston, William Dark, Horatio Gates, who, as you probably know, lived around here, others. They have a meeting, and they make a recommendation. They send a letter to the governor and to the assembly saying, you need to rewrite the draft law and put real penalties into it for non-compliance. And they did it like that. Cornwallis had just chased them out of Williamsburg. They were hiding in Charlottesville at the time. And they wrote a new statute that said, if you desert and you take your weapon with you, death penalty. If you refuse to join, we're gonna come find you, and instead of your 2 or 3 month militia tour, we're gonna put you in the Continental Army for a full term. So like real penalties. If you are the local people who are in charge of running this and you're not doing your job, we're gonna punish you too. First time they ever did that. Well, suddenly they got all the soldiers they need, right? But they're all militia, right? And Dark has no command. So he ends up leading militia down to Yorktown, even though he's a Continental officer. And during the battle, they perform well. His men do a lot of digging in the trenches. Let's go to the next one. Remember John Kercheval, the kid? So he's had a couple jobs now. He went and worked for the commissary department. He sat there doing paperwork when a bunch of soldiers who had been captured at Charleston were released. And he's just kind of hanging around. So when the assaults on redoubts 9 and 10 are about to happen at Yorktown, you know the history, right? When they take those 2 redoubts, then the British are stuck, right? French are going to take redoubt 9, the Americans are going to take redoubt 10. Kercheval goes to, he just says, the officer in charge of the assault, which might be Peter Muhlenberg, or it might be Alexander Hamilton, says, hey, can I join the assault? I want to like go up there and like help you guys attack the redoubt. And whoever the officer says, get lost, kid. So he goes over to the French and he says, hey, they won't let me join the assault. Can I go with you guys? And they say, sure, yeah, have at it, kid. So he helps, that's redoubt 10, but he's at redoubt 9. That's a fun story. And he applied for a pension even though he was never actually a soldier. And he writes in there that the French officer complimented him and said that he would make an excellent officer in the army. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, just about done. I do want to tell you about John Kay. So at the beginning of the war, when Thomas Berry had to recruit, he had trouble, right? So Daniel Morgan had already recruited his company. Morgan Alexander had already recruited his company. And it's getting hard to find guys. Remember I showed you that house he grew up in King George County? He went back to King George County and asked a bunch of his old buddies if they would join his company. And some of them did. John Kay was one of them. After the war, as a lot of these guys did, Kay moved to Kentucky, where they got bounty land as veterans. It's the only pay most of them ever got. He's buried at a little church in rural Kentucky. And this guy and a couple other guys with the Sons of the American Revolution, for the 250th, they've been trying to find graves of veterans and fix them up if they need it, or identify lost ones. They found John Kay under the snow at this little rural church. Let's go to the next one. That's what it'll look like in the ground. It's James Kay, his brother was John, they were both in the company. Let's go one more slide. So that's what it looks like cleaned up. It's no longer really serviceable, right? So let's go to the next one. So they got a new one. from the Department of Veterans Affairs. And they had a big ceremony there. I wrote a thing for them to read. Let's go to the next slide. There are a bunch of very proud and smiling descendants in attendance. I think most of them came from Texas for the event to honor their ancestor who fought in Thomas Berry's company in the Revolution. I think we've got one more. So this is a letter that Captain Berry wrote in 1818 to support the pension application for one of his soldiers. And it's going to be hard for me to read, but it says, I write this to certify that George Seifert enlisted in my company in February 1776. I can't read the whole thing, but he summarizes the service, and then he says that he acted with all of the faithfulness of a dutiful soldier, and certainly deserves a pension from Congress. Let's go to the next one. This is my website. This is the one I've had for 12 years or something. It's all about the 8th Virginia Regiment. So if you want to learn about the 8th Virginia specifically, that's where you should go, 8thvirginia.com. One more slide. This is the new one. I've widened the aperture. Now it's Virginia and the Revolutionary War, and it's not just me. I'm inviting other people to join me in writing things for it. So you might want to go there. You can subscribe and get, I promise, once a month an email from us with things. And then one more. And this is the book. It took me 20-some years to research, about 5 years to write. I wish I'd had another 5 years, it would have been even better, but at some point you just got to do it. I think it's unique insofar as it's not, they marched here and they shot these people and then they marched here and the colonel was this guy and the general was that. Regimental histories from the Revolution are very hard to write because there's just less to work with. I'm delighted to say that through lots of hard work, I found a ton of information on the 8th. That I don't know how replicable it is, but I'm sure there are other regiments that you just couldn't write a book like this on. But it's, what I like to say is it's not about the regiment exactly, it's about the men in the regiment, and some women. I start when they're kids. I start, with Daniel Morgan and William Dark duking it out in Battletown, and I end when a lot of these guys are in Kentucky in their log cabins as old men. So it's really about the people, which I think makes it a better read. So that's my presentation for you today. I went a little bit over, but I'm happy to take questions if that's okay.
I have one.
Yes?
You mentioned Dark and Berry, hanging out in Berryville, and you mentioned somebody named Isaac. Could that have been Isaac Zane?
Your guess is as good as mine. I was thinking Isaac Height.
Isaac Zane was a colonel or a general in the war.
Yeah. Yeah, could be.
Okay.
Yeah, that would make perfect sense. I wish he'd written in a last name. Would have been nice. Who else has a question?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned that thousands of Germans left Germany. What was going on in Germany?
Oh, boy. Do you have another hour? I actually gave a speech on that. If you go to, there's a YouTube channel that is linked from the Virginia 1776 website. There's actually a couple of them. One is on Heights and Bowmans in the Revolution. So those are guys from here. And then there's another one called Pennsylvania Dutch and the Virginia Continental Line. What a great title. That one's gotten a lot more clicks. It tells the whole story. But they were from the Rhine Valley, which was, after the Reformation, very Protestant, but close to Catholic France, and was therefore engaged in repeated religious wars. At the end of which the Catholics took charge. And a lot of them said, okay, we're out of here then. Partly because, the entire region had been destroyed by warfare. And I think because they're sick of the war. And, you know, it's just, you know, what we heard in grade school is true. They wanted religious liberty. They wanted to be able to, you know, worship the way they wanted to. And there was some recruiting. I mean, there were William Penn started that, you know, sending pamphlets saying, hey, come, you know, we're gonna let you be Lutherans or Calvinists or whatever it is you want to be, without anybody bothering you. And people wrote home and said it was great, and so more people came. Similar story from Northern Ireland. In that case, they were Presbyterians who were Protestants and had fought for the crown, but the crown didn't treat them well anyway. So they said, well, forget that, we're heading to America. So they mixed here in the valley.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear on what you said about the militia going to York.
Yes.
Because my ancestor enlisted near Winchester, was in the 8th Virginia under Bowman and Berry.
What was his name?
John Simpson.
Huh?
I think I even wrote to you about him. Because in his pension application, he describes being at Brandywine and Germantown, and, you know, all that lines up.
Yeah.
And he also said he was at York.
Okay, so,
So was he just fibbing, or did I get?
so that could mean a couple of different things.
Okay.
So if you look at the contemporary documents back then,
Mhm.
there are 3 Yorks.
Oh.
There's New York, and this is how people from here would have said it. There's New York, there's York, which is York, Pennsylvania, which was the seat of Congress for a year. And then there was Little York, which is Yorktown. They called it Little York to distinguish from York, Pennsylvania. So he said he was at York.
He said he was at the Siege of York.
Okay, well, that's Yorktown, for sure. But he was probably acting as a militiaman, right? So he probably left and I can check on this probably for you. But he probably his enlistment expired at Valley Forge probably.
Yes.
He went home, tended the farm, Cornwallis invades, and then like everybody, just, you know, we gotta go, boys, you know, gotta just defend the Old Dominion. So he was probably militia.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
But obviously an experienced and capable militiaman.
He was
Which-
Scottish.
Scottish,
He was Scottish.
Scotch-Irish or Scottish?
Scottish.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's great. Yes, sir.
You were
By the way,
saying-
this guy gets a prize for driving the farthest. He came down from Connecticut for it. He descends from a Germana settler in Culpeper, where so Germans, but not the same Germans as the ones we're talking about.
You were saying that your fascination with 8th Virginia, what got you first interested in it? Because I think I originally asked you if you were related to the Nevilles. that
No
were in
relation.
the Pittsburgh area.
No relation. I am related though to a buck private from Pittsburgh,
Okay.
a guy named Jonathan Grant, who was in William Cron's company. And we didn't talk about him today. I haven't learned any more about him than I knew when I started the project, but.
So was the 8th kind of just your first really experience in understanding the American Revolution, and that's why you kind of stick with it?
So I'm 58 years old,
Right.
and I lived a hop, skip, and a jump from Valley Forge Park when I was a little boy,
Okay.
from Bicentennial. So it was, Revolution War was just everywhere when I was a little kid. I was fascinated with it. I'll tell you one thing that really got my attention. My sister got a subscription to National Geographic when we were kids. And the July 1776 issue had a photo spread of photographs of Revolutionary War veterans. I think at that time we knew of about 6 or 7, obviously very old men, right? I think there are 10 or 12 that have been discovered now. But I just sat there, and I was like I was in a time machine, right? I was just fascinated by those pictures. So, I mean, you know, there's more I can tell you, but my whole life I've been interested in it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just a quick question. I don't know if you remember the year and the name of the ship that Peter Helfenstein came.
We know it, I don't remember it, I think it's in the book,
It is in the book, okay.
yeah. Yes, sir.
Curious about ancestry and decisions of individuals in the valley to either join the German Regiment 8th. You know, I don't hear the other regiments being referred to without, you know, the English one or the Scottish one or
Right.
something. But yet, most of the German settlers here in Winchester area, Frederick County, including the members of the Dutch mess, they went with Morgan, who would
Yes.
have been a Scottish, you know,
Right.
Presbyterian. So did that play a big role with people saying like, oh, well, Muhlenberger's German, I speak German, so I'm gonna sign up for his regiment?
So it's hard to tell exactly. What is clear though is that the Virginia leadership were very concerned about this, right? The reason they wanted a German battalion, as they called it, is because they weren't sure that the Germans were gonna serve, right? I mean, they had come here with the help of the crown. They were Lutherans, which is not that different from Anglican, right? If you go a little further west out to Hampshire County, a lot of them were Tories and loyalists, a lot of the Germans. And they just didn't know. Everybody knew the Scotch-Irish would fight. Germans, you know, didn't really know. They weren't by nature rebellious, right? They're disciplined and orderly, right? So I think they wanted Muhlenberg and Bowman and Helfenstein to kind of increase the comfort level of serving. I showed you that map of the recruiting area for the 8th. Most counties recruited one company. Dunmore County, Shenandoah County recruited 2. One of them was designated the English company, and the other one was designated the German company.